All right. Well, welcome everybody. I am so excited to be co-hosting. Really, honestly, they're doing most of the driving, but really excited to have Safe Cities with us today. The reason I'm so excited is, in my initial conversations with some other staff folks, I just realized that there was tremendous overlap between what we're trying to do here in REAMP, from electrification to transit to phasing out fossil fuels, that I just really wanted to build some awareness of the work and this network that exists out there. So we're here to explore some of the collaboration. Maybe that means, something that Reamp and Safe Cities is doing together. Maybe folks are joining the Safe Cities network. Maybe we're just here to explore possibilities. So it's a chance for you to learn more. And today's presentation is going to kind of cover some of the work that they're doing, and really dive into what they're doing here in the Midwest specifically. Safe Cities is a growing movement of neighbors, advocates, and government leaders phasing out fossil fuels and fast tracking clean energy solutions. And they are working with a growing number of people from the US and Canada. And Michelle, who is going to be leading the conversation today, really excited to have you here. Michelle's an organizer and has been her whole life. Even as a youngster, she rallied fellow students to demand better educational opportunities for low income communities. In college, she organized around immigration rights and worker rights. She currently leads the Safe Cities Organizing Network to combat the climate crisis through local action. And a random note, and we always love getting personal here in REAM, so this is great. She's a solid baker with an unrelenting love of YouTube workouts. She's also got two dogs and that frequently make Zoom appearances. So maybe we'll see them today. Maybe there'll be some guests in the room today. But with that, Michelle, I'm going to turn it over to you and the Safe Cities team to kick it off and tell us more about the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much. And I really do hope they appear, but I'm at the standing desk today. So that means they have to really beg for me to pick them up. So we'll see. We'll see how they go. Hi, I'm Michelle. I wanted to start off with this slide because I've spent some time in the Midwest and it's relevant to the story that I wanted to tell. So a little bit of who I am, because I think it's always important to have a little bit of who is this person? Why are they telling me these things? So it's helpful to kind of know where my story comes from and sort of the angle that I bring to this organizing work. So first of all, always start with little baby Michelle. I'm curious if y'all can recognize me. I've grown into my face as I've gotten a little bit older, but in case you can't, I'll give you a hint. I'm all the way at the far right with the beige shorts. I share this photo. This photo was taken as a senior in high school, and it was one of the first times I've had experienced an encounter with what does it mean to be a quote unquote environmentalist. I grew up in a part of Los Angeles that did not have a lot of green spaces. And so for this particular event, it was a scholarship ceremony for being an environmental leader. They had us drive all the way across town, throw some dirt. Each of us got two shovelfuls of dirt to plant a tree at the school that none of us went to. And I love this photo because it was years later, once I actually established myself in the environmental field and worked more on environmental justice issues, that I learned that the scholarship fund, the reason it existed was because I grew up in a community that had been gravely affected by a lot of environmental justice, including the Vernon Exide plant, which had exploded and had several, designated as a Superfund site. And the litigation that came from that resulted in them creating a scholarship fund. But of course, my understanding of the story at that time and for many years after was if you throw some dirt on a tree every couple years, then you are quote unquote environmentalist. But that didn't really sit well with the rest of my experience because I grew up in a place that looked like this. So for a lot of my time, I sort of didn't identify as an environmentalist. I thought of it as a rather shallow, really, designation. And it honestly wasn't until I spent some time in the Midwest during the first year of my college. I had an opportunity to spend some time in the Twin Cities doing an internship for the Headwaters Foundation for Social Justice. I'm not sure if they're still around. I think they probably are. And while I was there, I got really immersed in a very different life. The things that struck me in particular was how these Midwestern cities that are cold most of the year have these beautiful bike highways where this is very striking as a kid from LA. I did not know it was possible to do most of your things just by the power of your own 2 feet. I saw all these, the other thing that really struck me was being able to spend some time in organizing spaces with Indigenous leaders It is no secret that LA kind of really sweeps that Indigenous history under our rug. A lot of people are not familiar with the local Indigenous peoples. And spending time in the Twin Cities, I was like, oh, there's cultural centers. They have their own community gardens. They have their own organizations. And so I tell these stories because I think we can kind of get stuck in thinking about what is possible based on what we know in our immediate surroundings. So as a kid in LA, it's very easy for me to stick in like this, oh, environmentalists plant a tree every so often. And it wasn't until I kind of got out of where I grew up, saw other geographies, was I able to see what is possible in different areas. How can we create cities in a different way? And I think this really speaks to the ethos of a Safe Cities Network, which is meant to allow each city to come into its own, to find solutions that work for them under the same real general banner about fossil fuels are not getting us where we need to go, but also giving some room and allowance for people to explore solutions that are most appropriate to that. So I wanted to share that first about sort of who I am, and feel free to ask any questions. And I still have a lot of love for the Midwest. I go whenever I can. I have some good friends who live there. But without further ado, I think most of y'all came here to learn about what safe cities are. So I'm going to go ahead and hand that over to Logan to talk us through what these things are. Oh, and here's another photo of me that I always forget about. Also to mention that after that time in the Midwest, I became a big old activist, which is how I ended up here. But without further ado, let's talk about safe cities.
Awesome. Thank you, Michelle. And hello, everyone. My name is Logan McIntosh, and I'm a director at Stand.earth, leading the Safe Cities campaign. And I'm actually based in Vancouver, British Columbia, in unceded Coast Salish territory. And great to see many faces on this call. I'm going to start by giving just a bit of context around why the Safe Cities program exists and sort of the conditions that led to the creation of this movement, of this campaign. And this isn't news to any of you, but we know that we're in the middle of a climate crisis, and our national and state governments are not doing nearly enough, and they're not moving nearly fast enough. Part of that is because of political gridlock, because of vested interests that are involved in our political systems. But at the end of the day, we're just not seeing fast enough action from those other levels of government. Local governments, though, they actually can play a key role in getting our communities off of fossil fuels, and also in really leading the build out to a clean energy future. And they have the tools that they can actually use to protect their residents, all of us, from the health and environmental impacts of fossil fuel infrastructure. So they have the ability to use things like local permitting to actually get fossil fuels out of our buildings and our streets. And some of them are doing it. We're seeing cities across Canada and the US that are increasingly taking bold leadership, setting the bar, setting new standards for what this kind of bold climate leadership can look like. But at the same time, and this may be something that you've interfaced with, we're also hearing and seeing that many municipalities don't actually know that they have the jurisdictional authority to really lead on climate policies like this, especially ones that get fossil fuels out of our communities. And they're under-resourced, understaffed, and often a bit nervous about taking on risks, especially because they're being lobbied by the fossil fuel industry. And so it means that we need to be providing more support and more resources to really make the most of this opportunity at a local level. And so this is why we've created the Safe Cities movement. So the whole idea is that we're building a network of community groups, of elected officials that are phasing out fossil fuels and fast tracking clean energy solutions. And if we do that, and Michelle, if you move to the next slide, if we're able to build this kind of movement, then we can send a signal to also those national and state governments that they should follow. And I think maybe Alex will speak to this a bit later on, but we actually can see some real concrete examples of where this trend is happening, where local policy wins lead to state level and then eventually, hopefully, national level change. So breaking down a little bit more about what we mean by safe cities and what kind of policies we're looking to help to pass. So a hallmark of our safe policies are policies that specifically name and stop the expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure to accelerate that equitable transition to a clean, renewable energy economy. And so there are three main sort of categories of safe policies that we're focused on, and you can see those on the slide here. So the first is around protections from larger fossil fuel infrastructure expansion, which I'll get into in a minute. The second is around electrification policies that help us transition from gas to electricity in buildings and transportation. And then our third is around resolutions or non-binding commitments. And so those are the sort of three areas of policies that we're focused on. But to do that and to actually get these policies passed, we've divided our campaign into these areas. And so we will again talk more about this later, but we've found that, and actually this was a bit of a surprise for us as we've been doing this work, but there are a lot of local government champions that are already ready. They're out there, they want to take action. And so one of the main arms of our campaign is to provide direct support to local government champions. And so that looks like sample policies, legal and technical research, communication support, and actually building out a community of practice where we have 150 staff and electeds from across North America that come together. The second arm is around people power. So we know that for us to be successful in getting these policies passed, we need to be showing our elected representatives that there is this grassroots support and that their elected representatives and that their voters want to see these policies come into place. So we have built out an organizing program through training and working directly with community leaders at a local level. And then number three is around shifting the narrative. So communications capacity to make sure that stories are out in the world and people are actually hearing about and seeing that local governments are taking action and showing that there is this momentum and celebrating the policy wins that are happening. So that gives you a sense of the sort of the work that we do. And going back to the policies, so going back to, if we look at this next slide, so just to say a little bit more about the types of policies that we're focused on. So around this protection against fossil fuel infrastructure, what this looks like is supporting local governments in using things like local permitting to stop building out fossil fuel infrastructure. So that could look like stopping new gas stations from being built in a community to actually stopping refineries from being built or expanded. And so an example of this is Whatcom County, a refinery community in northern Washington, which last year passed an amazing policy that prohibits an expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure in the community. And it took years to organize for this to come into effect, but it's an amazing example of a local government putting in place a real groundbreaking policy that sets a new standard for what is possible at a local level. Petaluma, California also passed a prohibition on any new gas stations from being built. Culver City in Los Angeles banned any new drilling. So those are sort of examples of this policy bucket area. And what we see is that when local governments do this, it means that we can stop playing whack-a-mole of fighting one project at a time, and instead we are able to focus on transitioning our economy to something that will really support us and support livable, vibrant communities in the future. So to say a little bit more about the second area of policies that we support, these are non-binding resolutions. So this is often a great first step for communities all around the world. Any community can do this to show that we're taking a stand against fossil fuel expansion and signal that we're transitioning to new energies. And so one example is the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. So it's a mouthful for sure, but what this is it's similar to the nuclear non-proliferation treaty. So where we're endorsing this call to wind down fossil fuels all around the world. And this is any government can sign on to this, any local government. But basically this bucket for us, what it is it's a symbolic signal that shows that the local government is interested in joining our movement and is a great first step to join the Safe Cities movement. And so there are many examples of communities that have taken action in this way, and often a great kind of first step. And with that, I'll pause and I'll pass it actually to Alex, who was going to talk about this third policy area around electrification. And I'll pass it over to you, Alex.
Thanks, Logan. And thanks again for the invitation to come join you all today. My name's Alex Rammel. It's he, him pronouns. I'm based in Bellingham, Washington, and I'm a climate policy advisor with the Safe Cities campaign. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that third bucket that Logan mentioned, reducing demand for gas through electrification. And so this is, I think, one of the areas where we've seen some of the most exciting momentum and really a domino effect, I would say, in local government action. So just a little bit of background on why electrification in buildings is important. Gas stoves, furnaces, gas hot water heaters are a major source of climate pollution in buildings throughout the United States. Methane is the main component of natural gas, and it's a fossil fuel. It's a major polluting factor, and we cannot afford to continue to build buildings and install appliances and equipment that are reliant on using fossil fuels. Whenever we sort of think about putting in a new gas furnace, keeping in mind that what we're really committing to doing is using those fossil fuels for the lifetime of that equipment, 25 years plus. There are also significant human health implications to using fossil fuels in our homes and buildings. As recent research has emphasized this. Kids who grow up in homes with a gas stove, for example, have a 42% higher chance of developing asthma symptoms. We have good technology replacements and heat pumps and induction stoves that are available now that work in all climates and that are ready to go. We've started to see this movement really gain traction. So a few years ago in Berkeley, California, they were one of the first city that was on my radar to adopt a policy limiting natural gas in new construction. And almost as soon as that happened, other cities around the area picked up and adopted similar measures. And at this point, I think 54 cities in California have passed a similar policy. This really, in my mind, is proof of concept of the theory of change. And I think it makes a lot of sense. I don't know what your all's experience has been, but whenever I talk to local government leaders, city council members, or mayors about any public policy idea I have brought and put in front of them, one of the first things, if not the first question, then probably the second question is, what other cities are already doing this? And once you have examples of success in an area, then it's much easier for those local government leaders to say, oh, if other people are doing it, it can work here too. Once that policy had started moving beyond California, it's been adopted now in cities in Massachusetts and Washington State and in New York. And I think in Washington State, we've got additional sort of proof of concept of our theory of change, which is that last fall, city of Seattle adopted electrification in buildings policy. Then we saw a couple of other cities, Bellingham, where I am, Shoreline, passed very similar policies. Other local governments started putting it on the docket. And then our state building code council, just a few months ago, adopted a statewide policy that mirrored what Seattle and these other local governments were doing. And that policy goes into effect next summer. It's the most climate-friendly building codes in any state, anywhere in the country, based on that local government leadership, following the leadership by those local governments. So what that means for all of you is that the time that I and other members of the Safe Cities team was planning to spend helping other local governments in Washington adopt those kinds of policies is now available to help folks in other states think through what it looks like there. And so there's a chance for us to sort of pick this up and help out in other states, including places in the Midwest. And eager to start talking with folks about what that can look like in your communities. So mention just a couple of quick details about this and sort of some of the opportunities and challenges. So Logan already talked about the sort of buckets of support that Safe Cities campaign can offer in terms of helping with message development, helping with local government policy support, movement building. But specifically on this topic of building electrification, we do have a couple of unique challenges, one of which is that some state governments have seen this movement coming, and fossil fuel interests have pushed those legislatures to preempt that local authority. So I've just mentioned that that is the case, I think, in Iowa, and Ohio, and Kansas in the Midwest, and Michigan legislature may be contemplating that. So if you're in one of those jurisdictions, the road here might be a little bit more difficult, but would still be interested to discuss with you what options might be available. And then, because this is something that is growing into a national movement, and because it is a challenge for it's a threat to fossil fuel profit margins, this is something we're starting to see coordinated messaging happening, same message popping up in different communities all across the country, which means that they're playing from the same playbook, and we can learn from that, and we can learn from the messages that they're using and what's working to counter that in other places, and share those success stories with folks as they come in. I will also just mention a couple of other sort of electrification related policy opportunities that are sort of part of that same bucket. And would also be excited to local governments about adopting. Transit infrastructure, especially electric buses, is a huge opportunity for both reducing climate pollution and also improving local air quality and human health outcomes. And then community choice aggregation is, in short, a way for local governments to support development of renewable energy and make sure that folks living in that community have access to power that's coming from cleaner sources. Folks are interested in working on that. I'd love to work with you on that as well. And I think at this point, I am turning it over to Lewis.
Great, thanks, Alex.
All right, thanks.
My name is Lewis Kuhlman. I'm the environmental planner for the city of La Crosse, and I've been involved with Safe Cities for at least the past few months, if not more than a year. And one of the things that are kind of a priority for the city is being carbon neutral by 2050. And a lot of communities have committed to that. And it's really revolves around the language of greenhouse gas emissions. So while you and I both know that fossil fuels and greenhouse gases are connected, using the language of greenhouse gas emissions just seems to be a little bit more palatable for some of our council members. A little background is La Crosse has a population of about 50,000, and it's a college town. So it's not like Madison or Milwaukee, but it's still it's still, a little more liberal leaning. So as I mentioned with the language, I think that's kind of been one of the challenges around passing the policies. Some of our council members aren't too keen on calling out fossil fuels, especially because La Crosse is the headquarters of quick trip convenience stores. So if you're a fan of those, here's where they come from. And then also they try to avoid um, getting into bigger policy debates or like stuff that's at the national level. So in terms of the initial Safe Cities resolution, I had to finesse some of the language to talk about greenhouse gas emissions, and then also rather than saying fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty, I said, intergovernmental agreements on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So just kind of slight language tweaks that made it a little bit more palatable, but still, I think, mean the same thing. Working with Safe Cities has been great. I mean, the meetings have been really helpful, and a lot of the communities are based in California or on the East Coast, and it have different state rules. So for you that know about that, like there's home rule and Dillon's rule. So home rule is like where cities can do whatever they want, and then the states can say, I don't know, whatever. But then the states are like, for Dillon's rule, it's like they say whatever the cities can do. So they really restrict that. So like when Alex was talking about preemptions, that's an example. So in terms of like banning stuff, we kind of have a challenge. So my work in the planning department, we talk a lot about zoning. So creating tighter restrictions on things may not lead to an outright ban, but it could make it really difficult and daunting for someone to build new fossil fuel infrastructure. So kind of looking at creative ways to get to what we want to do without actually a ban is a challenge. Another thing I appreciate is when I see stories about what other communities are doing, I'm like, I want to emulate that, and I need a policy. And Safe Cities is really good about like cutting through that and going right to the policy. Like, here's a link to their resolution or their ordinance, as opposed to like, going through multiple news sites to find that. They're really good about that. And then also, it's helped me, or my sort of zoning knowledge, I've been able to help people in communities in New York and Virginia, and they've also helped me in giving me feedback. So kind of building those links between states can also be beneficial. And lastly, for those of you who have preemptions, I think the getting together and using your voice as multiple communities in that state, I think is a strong way to hopefully overcome those preemptions and make them a thing of the past. So thank you. I'll pass it back to Michelle.
Sweet. Thank y'all for that wonderful presentation, being so articulate about things that are hard to explain sometimes. So with that, I think for these webinars, we want to, as much as possible, be hearing from y'all on the call too, and hearing what y'all's reactions are, what questions are coming up. So to do that in a somewhat structured way, we are going to use a Jamboard, which if y'all are not familiar with, I will walk you through / give you opportunities to not use the Jamboard if the Jamboard's not working. A Jamboard is basically a space where you can, it's like a whiteboard, but digitally. So we created one for this conversation, and Nathan will be both dropping the link so y'all can access it from the link and type directly into it, or you can take yourself off mute, or you can raise your hand, or you can chat. But if you're able to get in there, you'll see the little sticky note, and you could add some of your thoughts. That way we can have a visual log of what people are asking and curious about, and then we'll do our best to answer. So with that, I'll let people start populating it. It seems like do we have any anonymous critters in there yet? Or if anybody has a question that they just wanted to speak into the room, feel free to do that now.
I have just a really quick question. So municipalization of the utilities. There's movements afoot here in Southeast Michigan for that to happen, with the goal of, you municipalize the utility and then you democratize it, because not all municipals are really democratic. have y'all been doing any work around that or seen any trends in that direction?
I'll jump in on that. Michelle, do you want us to answer questions, or do we want to just put questions on the board?
You can answer questions.
We have not done a lot of work on that. I think the sort of logistics of what that takes and whether it makes sense to do depend very much on the sort of regional and sort of statewide structures for electric utilities. I think in some places, though, it is very much a great idea. And you're talking about electric utilities, right? Not gas utilities.
Really, any utility.
Mm.
I mean, the goal is to, take them over, electrify them. I mean, because here we have it's not strictly an electric utility. It's an electric utility. It's unfortunately it's still got coal. It's still got gas, and the point of taking them over is to pull those things off the portfolio. So yeah.
Yeah, short answer is we haven't worked on it. I think it's an awesome idea, though.
Thank you for that. I think that was Kim. Kim, who are you? Do you want to introduce yourself too?
Yeah, Kim Hunter, he, his pronouns, I'm in Detroit, which is Anishinaabe land, Council of Three Fires, and I work for Engage in Michigan. We do media support for social justice groups.
Awesome. Let's see, I have Melissa with their hand up, and folks can also use the raise hand feature, and then I will read some of the post-it notes out too.
Yeah, hi everybody, Melissa Gavin, Reamp Network, and I put a couple of my questions or what challenges me onto the Jamboard, but I do want to speak it into the room, and there are two that I'm really challenged with right now. Being in the Midwest, we know that, Michigan and I could see Wisconsin going that route too of preemption, like how quickly we saw that happen in Iowa and Kansas and Ohio last year. And I guess, I'm wondering what are the strategies, what can be done, or how do you nuance this conversation so that you don't bring that upon a state when it wasn't, you don't ask for it to happen. And so I'm very nervous about that. In the Midwest, we flock together. So Wisconsin likes to see what Minnesota's doing, what Michigan's doing, what's Iowa doing, and so this could happen very quickly in Wisconsin and Michigan, and possibly other states as well. So how do you? I guess I'm just naming that concern that it could provoke the legislatures to act when they weren't going to in the first place. And then a second challenge that I have as I talk to colleagues in California is how low income and environmental justice communities were impacted by those bans and how quickly they came about, and how if groups could go back and do it again in a different way, they might have gone about it in a different way. And so just kind of curious if you've had any lessons learned, because those groups were impacted in ways that I didn't work in California, but that activists didn't really foresee. And now there are some learning moments.
I could speak a little bit. From my planning perspective, what I would say is I usually try and draw on existing policy when I'm working on something new. So for example, in Wisconsin, the governor has a climate action plan. So trying to find at least some kind of policy support in an existing document can help. Hopefully head off that sort of, reactionary possibility, but you never know with the different, when the legislature's a different leaning than the governor. But that's what I try to do, is just like at least use a kernel of existing policy as the basis for something new and connecting it, making that connection clear. I think helps people more likely accept it than reject it. But that's a good concern, or that's a, yeah.
Anybody else want to tag in on that question?
I think just Alex, you mind if I jump in real quick? There's a piece around, I think there's what's possible in different places, and we've seen jurisdictions get really creative where they may not have the ability to do an outright ban on certain things, but they do like kind of de facto bans to get around different pieces. So like we saw in Massachusetts, a place passed a policy on a gas ban, and the state said, no, you can't do that. And then they came back and were like, okay, well, we're not going to do a gas ban, but if you want to build a building here and get a permit from us, you need to sign an agreement saying you're not going to put gas in the building. Basically, finding creative ways to get around stuff. And we've also seen in Canada, actually, where they don't have as much land use powers, finding creative ways by saying that the building has to be at this amount efficient, or at this kind of this amount of emissions and things like that, which basically doesn't say you can't use gas or you can't use other pieces, but it's basically, it's the same thing because they can't meet those goals while using gas or other fossil fuels. So there's all kinds of creative strategies and different things that communities can do. And as far as unintended consequences to that piece, I think we found it's very, very important. Every community is going to be different. And always, whenever crafting these policies, we like to encourage folks to meet with their community, with all aspects of the community, labor, faith, not just environmental groups and climate groups, but environmental justice all over the map, and get all those folks to feed into the process when building these policies. And we found the best examples are when the whole community comes together and builds something that works for everyone.
And if I could both also answer a little bit of that one and then highlight a theme of that question. So Melissa, you raised some of these questions around the equity concerns. And just to give you a little bit of preview of what I'm going to talk about later on, I am an organizer for the Safe Cities campaign. And for me, one of the big things about doing this kind of work is not just pursuing a specific type of policy, but fundamentally changing our communities and how communities share power. And so if we get a policy across the finish line, but we haven't done the work to actually get people engaged, then those are vulnerable policies. We can have somebody else come in and we don't have the space to defend it. So with that in mind, I don't have any perfect answers. Would it be great if I did? I would probably have so much money from all the foundations, but I can say that the part of what we're doing here is creating a network of folks to share some learning practices. And we know that those look very different based on your geographies. So I'll talk a little bit later about the Safe Cities organizing network, but that's one of the primary things, is helping people wrestle with these questions and help people share tips about, like, okay, I do want to reach out to the faith community, but I don't have any relationships. How might I go about that? I want to reach out to the Latino community. So I'm Mexican American, so that's one that's near and dear to my heart. And that's a question I frequently get. And I'm like, well, it depends a lot on where you are and like what kind of Latino do you have? I want to also flag that has come up as well, slightly different in the Post-it notes, where there's a first one about how to ensure folks aren't left behind financially when fossil fuel bans come to communities, and insufficient outreach to working class people in the fossil fuel industry. So I also welcome, if folks have any specific thoughts about people who work in the industry, please also speak that into the space. But if not, Elliot, you have your hand up.
Michelle, I might just jump in quickly on that point and want to emphasize two things in that space. One, just so we're on the same page, what we're really talking about here is new construction. Fossil fuel ban is a very shorthand way that sometimes to talk about this, and sometimes gets assumed that things like we're just going to shut off, that we're proposing shutting off gas service to whole communities, and that's not what's being discussed at all. What we're talking about is new construction. And I do think it's really, really important in these conversations we don't allow builders who are very focused on first cost to manage the narrative around that, because what really matters to folks living in the homes that are in the buildings that are constructed is the operating costs and the construction costs. And really what we have seen consistently in the research that's been done in Washington State and done by Rocky Mountain Institute, looking at jurisdictions around the country, is that the overall energy costs, operating and maintenance costs go down when we're using much more efficient electric, clean electric heat pumps. And then, yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I don't know if Donna meant to jump in.
Okay. And then the other thing I just wanted to mention, the point about engaging with labor on this is so important, because it's absolutely true that there's more skilled work in putting in clean, efficient electric systems, but it is different workers. And so making sure to engage with the folks who have traditionally put in fossil fuel equipment, and making sure that we're thinking about how those skills can be used in other parts of the clean energy economy, and making sure that there's a pathway and a transition that gives people some predictability is really, really important.
Thank you, Alex. Elliot, I know you've been waiting very patiently.
Thanks so much, Michelle. I just wanted, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Wonderful. I just wanted to jump in on this point about workers in the fossil fuel industry. Just to introduce myself, I recently graduated college at American University in DC, and I have collaborated with a number of climate organizations here in the capital. I'm originally from St. Louis, Missouri, so I have that perspective as well. But my family is from a rural part of Texas, and oil drilling out in West Texas is a very important economic way that people get their living. And part of my even though I am part of the climate movement, part of my college was funded by money from oil, and I know that many other people in that area are relying on oil to make a living, and these are well-meaning people. So I've been a bit disheartened about the lack of what I consider to be detailed outreach to these fossil fuel workers. And to the person who just spoke, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting your name. Let me see if I can pull it up here.
It was either me or Alex, I think.
Yeah, Alex. Yeah, you're right. The distinction is being lost about no new fossil fuel projects versus shutting down the old ones. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the goal of many climate activists is to eventually shut down these old projects, even if that's not being stated up front. So I think that certainly some leaders from the fossil fuel community need to be elevated, and if we're going to win over these communities, we need to be specific about what kind of economic prospects these workers will have.
Very much appreciate you speaking that into the space, Elliot. I dropped it in the chat, but my sister lives in West Texas, and so I've spent a fair amount of time over there. And it is very striking how those communities are really built around that and how dependent they are. So I won't say, again, we don't have all the answers. I think that's part of the conversation and acknowledgement that we are pretty West Coast and East Coast focused at this time, but we're hoping to unearth some of these pieces as we move forward. I believe, Kim, your hand's back up. What you got?
Sorry, because I'm sorry, I was just going, yeah, this is a real thing for me too, because I live in Detroit, right? Auto industry place. Part of my family is from, had roots in East Texas and Houston area. That's all oil too. So, I mean, between the auto industry and the oil, there's a lot of folks here that are, even though the auto industry is making transition. But I'll just jump to the point. I think one of the main things that has to be put forward, federal, state, local, regional policy, is transitioning workers to work that is healthier for them and healthier for their communities. And that work has to have, and we have to emphasize that work has to have the same pay and benefits of the work that they currently have. But the emphasis on health, right? You will get to spend some more time with your grandchildren, and it won't be with the oxygen mask on, like some folks I know, right? And that's whether you work in oil or coal mine or whatever, right? That is some of the same with the oil is more cancers, but in any event, the health aspect of it, the longer life, better life, healthier life with the same pay, doing work that will keep you alive and keep your community alive. That's something that has to be emphasized big time.
Thank you. I think Logan wanted to jump in about an earlier point.
Yeah, it is actually, it's going back a little bit to something that Melissa was bringing forward, and just really appreciated the flag around, or the concern around, not wanting to provoke retaliation or poke the bear. And I think that connects also to some of Lewis, what you were talking about in terms of how to craft language in a way that maybe will make the policies a little bit more accessible, or create less of that backlash. And I think that for me, just think that that's such a good point for us to be considering, and goes back to the purpose of this meeting today, which I think is to kick off the beginning of a conversation around what does it look like to bring safe cities into the Midwest, and what does it look like for us to design a strategy that really fits the unique regional elements of what we're talking about. And I think that that's been one of our key learnings with the Safe Cities movement, is we are trying to build something that is replicable and create that domino effect. However, we need to make sure that that is placed within the unique context of the regions that we're working within. And so to me, this is the beginning of a rich and robust conversation around what are the right sort of steps as we look to build out more of this local power in the Midwest. What does that look like, and how do we craft a strategic plan, so to speak, in terms of what the right steps are? And I'll say in Canada, we are having similar conversations where there are some provinces that have governments that are supportive and some that are very opposed. And so we're putting together a plan around what it looks like to move in some regions in groups, so that no one community is left standing on their own, and to also be thoughtful about the language that we're using, so that it's not necessarily provoking backlash, or if we are provoking that backlash, that it's intentional, and that we have the resources and support to be ready, because sometimes that works well too. So I just wanted to go back and underline that those are great questions, and ones that we don't have room to answer now, but I think is exactly where we're hoping the conversation will go over time.
Let's see, Elliot, you want to give us our final cue before we go into the rest of
Fine. That's a lot of pressure.
the better be the best cue. Just kidding.
Well, thank you. I think this local focus is really needed, based on the organizations I've worked with that have had this very top-down approach. I do think that there is a question of professionalization, and I can kind of explain what I mean by that. You know, Washington, D.C., where I went to college, is a lot more professional than St. Louis culturally, in many ways. And I think that language like accessibility and you know, some of these terms just are not going to be understood by people who live there, in some parts of the Midwest, frankly. And you know, I think that just needs to be considered, and I think turning to people who live in these areas is much needed.
Mm-hmm. Oh, as always, thank you for bringing that into the space, because that is an always constant conversation Logan and I are having, where this is by its nature can be a very wonky, easy to get lost, very nitty-gritty type of campaign, but in reality, like, we're talking about a very human experience. And so how are we making sure that we're translating the right amount of information? So that's also a topic of conversation that regularly happens internally and also within our organizing network. So as we kind of wrap up this Q&A thing, and I kind of hope y'all have more questions, because that means you want to continue talking to us, and you should keep talking to us. But I know we've been talking mostly about the things that challenge us in the work, but I wanted to highlight a few of the things that excite us about this work, which it's almost as if I told y'all what to put on the sticky notes, because I think a lot of y'all were talking about the network. And I was like, oh yeah, wonderful. We have folks talking about connecting safe cities to Grand Rapids Climate Coalition. I really want to know what they're doing. The local leaders being able to connect with one another, having a national network of government staff, which is what we're going to pitch to y'all. And, you know, the possibility of actually bringing these wonky federal programs into people's homes and lives and everyday experience. So with that, let's see, I'm gonna kind of blindside Nathan. Nathan, is there any chance you can pull up the Canva? No worries if you can, but it'll take me longer to find my mouse.
Yes.
Thank you. But all that is to say is that we need y'all for this work. We can't do this piece alone. So if you go all the way to the slide with the ship. Oh, yeah. To end fossil fuel expansion, we need all hands on deck. So how do we do that? We already preluded some of it, but just to give a little bit more specificity, if you go to the next slide, we have the Safe Organizing Network, which is really a community. Oh, you can go back. Community of individual activists and groups who are organizing on SAFE. We have monthly network calls. You get to hang out with me. So as you can imagine, they can be a little ridiculous. There's always a silly little check-in question. We have organizing and safe topic trainings. So just so y'all know, sort of the things that we've done in the past, we've done sort of power mapping and be able to see who your elected officials are. Currently, a lot of our folks are actually asking more specific guidance on how to communicate in the world of fossil fuel opposition. And also it is a reoccurring constant theme of how do we make this movement more accessible to frontline communities. We have guest speakers and campaign spotlights. And then of course, if you're part of the organizing network, that also means you have an opportunity to check in with me pretty regularly, which honestly, you can also check in with me, but it's nice if you're formally part of it. And I can talk, I'm more than happy to talk to the groups as well. You also get access to organizing materials and resources as you go through that. So that might look like, you know, examples of the policies, obviously, but also some other things like amplifying via our Stand, you know, social media to be able to highlight your work and be connected in that way. One of the big things I'm working on too is creating networks of different geographies that talk to one another. So this is obviously naturally built into it. Midwestern folks talking to other Midwestern folks, folks in college towns talking to other folks in college towns, folks in Texas talking to other folks in Texas. So it doesn't feel so prescribed. So if you're interested in with that, Nathan's going to drop the link and it will also be in a follow-up email to how to sign up via the Safe Organizing form. You can also email me directly at michelle.pignon@stand.earth. Little flag, I will be out of office all of August, but I will get back to you immediately in September. And you can also just go to the safe@stand.earth, drop us an email there as well. That is an inbox that is monitored by all of us, so we can also get to you a little bit more quickly. So that's if you're interested in joining the organizing network. I particularly recommend this if part of your campaign is going to have to involve community organizing and getting folks beyond the professional paid staffers involved, which all of y'all should be doing, but you know, in case that's a major priority. But if you're an elected, let's tell you how to get involved as well. The dogs are going, sorry. Okay, Alex.
Thanks, Michelle. So I tend to think of this as sort of the inside game versus the outside game, right? So outside game is building a movement of organizers and folks in the community who are going to speak up and say it's time to stop expanding fossil fuels. Inside game is really making sure that folks working in the local government have the tools, have the details, have the information they need, have the connections to experts to be able to understand those decisions, justify those decisions, and ultimately make those decisions and turn them into the law. And so the organizing network that Michelle was talking about is the outside game. The inside game is this NEOS network for elected officials and staff for local governments. And this includes paid staff, but also includes folks who are part of a planning commission or other sort of local government advisory committees that may be advising the city council or county commission. So our colleague Anne organizes a network call every other month. We manage listservs so that throughout, anytime questions come up, folks are able to get information, not just from us, but from peers, from other folks in other local governments who've been through some of those same challenges. Through that network, we're able to share everything from sample legislation to support with communications and messaging and those kinds of details as well. If you are an elected official or volunteer with the local government advisory committee or working with staff, or if you're working with some of those folks and think that they might be interested, put them in touch with us. Again, that safe@stand.earth email address is probably the best way to reach out and get folks connected there. And with that, am I closing, Michelle, or are you?
You can close. Why don't you close?
Well, I will just say thank you again to all of you for coming today to join us and inviting us to share what we're doing with the Safe Cities campaign. We're excited to hear about what opportunities you all see, and looking forward to having more feedback, more follow-up in the coming weeks. Looking forward to connecting with all of you. Thanks for
We're so quick. We have 4 minutes to spare. So I'll let folks hop off. We have formally concluded, but if folks want to stay on for a couple minutes and ask any additional questions. But thank you all so much for coming.
Thanks, everyone. And
Yeah,
can we
well,
see your dog?
Thank you, everyone, for. Yeah.
Yay!
Sorry, she has a rival Chihuahua that she gets very angry about. And the other day I was on my way to the gym and I just stood in the middle and I could just hear them barking. It was very Romeo, Juliet, Montague, Capulet situation.
Well, thank you all very much too for presenting and sharing your dog with us.
Of course. All right, if there's no further questions, I will officially close the Zoom room. Bye, y'all.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.